So Ellen is here with us, and she's got an update actually on a story that we covered previously on the show. Although I don't think you were here for it, Ellen. You just you just saw this story in you're doing your show prep, and you thought you found it interesting.
Right. I just stumbled upon this actually on Reuters.com. You say it like Reuters, right?
Reuters, yeah.
Reuters,
yeah.
okay.
And
for some reason, I thought it was Routers.
It does look that way, or like Reuters or something. Maybe or do they pronounce it Reuters? Reuters. Okay. See, who knows? But
Daryl knows.
This thing. This guy. His name is Charlie Shrem. He's actually a former advertiser with Free Talk Live.
Oh, wow.
Bitinstant was his company, and we had Bitinstant on board here for many months on Free Talk Live before things kind of went south with the company, and that's a whole other story. And then there's these criminal charges that he got, he picked up, and that's, again, it's a crazy situation where he was basically just trying to help somebody get some Bitcoin, but apparently there's all these rules that the government wants you to follow about identifying people, and they claim that he wasn't following those rules. That's kind of a short version of the indictment, which was multiple pages, and I did take a look through the actual indictment where they apparently one of the reasons why Charlie got caught was because he was not encrypting his conversation. So when he was doing business, when he was talking about the things that he was doing with others and with the person in question, he was just using straight up unencrypted emails. So it was not hard at all for the feds to do the investigation of this matter and take him down.
So the feds were just following after this man because they thought he looked suspicious?
Oh, God. I forget. It's been a long while since I read the indictment. I forget what it was that tipped them off to start investigating him. So I can't answer that question right now. But share the update with us. What's going on?
Okay.
And where's it from?
Well, it's actually a very sad story to me from Reuters.com. Bitcoin promoter pleads guilty to unlicensed use of currency. And it shows a picture of him walking out of the federal court in Lower Manhattan on the 4th. Okay, so that was yesterday. Mm-hmm. This is very recent. A man who helped to promote Bitcoin wants to remain in the business despite pleading guilty Thursday to indirectly helping send more than $1 million in the digital currency to users of the illicit online marketplace Silk Road, his lawyer says. So right out the bat, they're making it sound, just like the worst crime ever because this illicit yeah, exactly. This is like the real Silk Road, where all the black market deals go down and all the scum of the earth just gather there. Like that's what it sounds like to me. And you can tell that this is already biased.
Absolutely. It's hard to get the mainstream media to be, to give the Silk Road a fair shake. That's just not going to happen. We'll do it here on Free Talk Live because I understand the Silk Road and I understand how it brings so much safety to the underground black marketplace. And I think, to me, the people operating the Silk Road and the people running within the Silk Road are in a lot of cases heroes. Now, there are scam artists on the Silk Road as well, but the people running the service are doing some amazing work.
Right, just because it's based on total free market principles. And there's a lot more that goes on there than just drug use. And
that's true.
I think
you could buy books on the Silk Road.
Yeah, it's helpful. I think it teaches people how to better deal with one another. But I guess not everyone shares that opinion.
All right, so tell me more about what happened with Charlie Shrem. So he walked out of court yesterday.
Charlie Shrem, 24, pleaded guilty at a hearing in New York federal court to one count of aiding and abetting an unlicensed money transmitting business. A co-conspirator, Robert Fiala, 54, separately pleaded guilty to operating such a business. Both men face up to 5 years in prison when they appear again in court in January.
Oh.
I knew that much of the business on Silk Road involved the buying and selling of narcotics, Shrem said in court. I knew that what I was doing was wrong. See, that's the sad part to me is that he said that he thought he was doing something wrong.
Yeah, I totally agree with your assessment on this, Ellen. That it's obviously not wrong to exchange one currency for another for your customers, regardless of whatever the purpose of the customer is. And in this case, he did know that he was dealing with somebody who was doing business on the Silk Road. And I think the other guy, the guy you mentioned, Robert Fiala. Anyway, that guy was the other person in this matter, and he was essentially offering a cash exchange. So he wasn't doing drug sales. He was
No.
on the Silk Road offering to exchange cash for Bitcoin for people.
Right, and it's
Okay.
ridiculous to think that he's responsible for what happens to whatever he's selling or buying after the transaction happens.
Hold on. So, based on the allegations, as I'm hearing them against Charlie Shrem and the other guy, then would not every one of the check cashing services across the country be guilty of this? Because they're generally used by low-income people that live in bad neighborhoods that may or may not light things on fire that affect their brain.
There's a good chance that someone walking into a check cashing service to get cash out for the weekend is going to go spend that on drugs.
More
There's a good
likely
chance.
than not, right?
Yeah. Whether the drugs are legal or illegal is another question, and I imagine there's a good mix of that.
Right, but so if they're going after Bitcoin because people are using Bitcoin to buy drugs, well, people are using dollars to buy drugs too.
That's what they've been using for generations.
Well, that's the thing about this is that ultimately Shrem wasn't funding drug sales directly, and
No.
it's the feds are presuming that that he was that the money going into the Silk Road was ultimately going to buy drugs. Again, you can go and buy legal stuff
Yes.
on the Silk Road. Anyone can put any kind of product up. Yes, it's true. There are lots of drug entries there. Yes,
This
there
is
are
based
fake
on
IDs.
a lot of hypothetical assumptions, though.
Well, but that's just it. They're not charging him with conspiracy to commit drug sales, and they're not charging him with conspiracy to money launder. They're like they are with some of the operators or the alleged operators of the Silk Road. They're charging him with running an unlicensed money transmitting business, correct? That was what he pled guilty to.
Right.
So by that
Okay.
charge, they've got him by the
Right.
balls.
Legally, that one makes direct
it's
sense.
a stupid charge.
It
shouldn't
is.
It shouldn't exist. And this all these money transmitter laws, which money transmitter is a legal term and it's got a definition that's very nebulous. But all these money transmitter laws are in existence because of the war on drugs, essentially, because they want to supposedly stop money laundering. These are some of the reasons for the Know Your Customer legislation and stuff like that. A lot of that was pushed by the war on drugs.
Actually, the Know Your Customer stuff came about because of the USA Patriot Act, because we
is it
got to make
terrorism?
sure that the banks aren't funding terrorists.
Yeah, well, isn't it kind of useful for the government if there's a black market that exists? Because if they allow like major and small transactions to coexist like on the black market level, but then only go after a few of the major transactions, but allow the the basis for the black market to stay alive, then they've got something to keep them busy all the time.
They sure do.
So it's kind of like in prison when they keister things, and
What is a keister?
there's
What
a
is
whole
that?
business going on.
What's a
Go
keister?
in and out of the prison. So I heard this when I was on Puke and the Gang last week. The hobo that was guest starring on the show told us prison stories, and he was
Oh.
saying that keistering was when prisoners hide something in their anus and they take it into prison, and there's a lot of
It's true. They do.
business going on in
Yes.
and out of the prison with these trustees who work who do community service kind of stuff.
Right. Yep, it's true. That's one of the more effective ways to get things in and out of a prison. Toll-free number, 855-450-FREE. I just hadn't heard that term before. 855-450-3733. And Daryl, you used to work in a prison. Had you heard that one?
I had not, but I knew what she was talking
More coming
about.
up. It's Free Talk Live. Talking about the sentencing of, or what would be at some point the sentencing of Charlie Shrem. There's some kind of a plea deal involved, but there's also a sentencing still that has to happen. We'll get into that here in a moment. He is charged with running an illegal money transmitting business, an unlicensed money transmitting business, trying to give people bitcoins in return for cash. And so they've come after him for that. And I'm sure that the feds are hoping this is going to be a scary thing for other people that are doing business with Bitcoin to try to scare them off. And we were talking a moment ago about the Silk Road. Shrem himself was not doing sales on the Silk Road. He was not selling drugs, but he was selling Bitcoin to someone who was selling Bitcoin on the Silk Road, or rather selling cash, I think, on the Silk Road. And I think that was how it was working. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't read the indictment in 6 months. And the Silk Road's an amazing thing. It is a black marketplace for the internet. And there are other ones now. In fact, I was just reading an article about Agora Marketplace, which has become bigger than the Silk Road. There's now Silk Road
What?
2.0. and Agora Marketplace has more listings than the Silk Road does.
How recent is this?
I just saw this headline literally within the last 48 hours, so I don't know when the story was written, but I suspect it's fairly recent. But Silk Road's still going strong. It's not to say Silk Road's doing poorly. Silk Road was shut down in October of last year.
Right. I'm just shocked that I haven't heard this name more
Agora?
often, though.
Agora Marketplace?
Yes.
It's worth looking at. It's a nice-looking site. They've done a good job with it. And they came out after the Silk Road was taken down. So when Silk Road went down, there were these other ones that popped up. Some of them turned out to be scams. So far, the Agora Marketplace hasn't taken everybody's money and run yet. But it's always interesting to watch the way these things play out. So Silk Road got taken down by the FBI.
Right, because people
October.
were fearing things like that. Like somebody was going to take the money and run.
Well, that's not why Silk Road was taken down. Silk Road was taken down by the feds because they want to stop the drug trade, or at least that's the supposed story. In this case, we all know that they're not going to stop the drug trade. And in point of fact, if you let Silk Road continue, it will actually reduce the violence involved in the drug trade because on the Silk Road, no one knows anyone else.
Right, there's no face-to-face interaction,
Ever.
so there's no chance of like a knife fight in
You
an
can't be
alley
robbed.
or something.
That's
Yeah.
correct. You cannot be robbed, at least in person. You can't have a gun or a knife held to you. You can't be beaten physically. None of that stuff happens on the Silk Road. You can still get ripped off. There's still some people that will offer a product and then they will not deliver that product. And so there's problems. Nothing's perfect, but it certainly is a major improvement. So they took the Silk Road down in October, and then the Silk Road came back a month later. So they didn't really do much of anything to stop the online drug marketplace, but they have charged some guys, some males, criminally. 4 guys were arrested last year. One of them, Ross Ulbricht, alleged to be the founder of the Silk Road, a.k.a. Dread Pirate Roberts. He's been facing some pretty serious charges, including conspiracy to commit money laundering, conspiracy to deal drugs, conspiracy to hack, because on the Silk Road there were hacking tools available for sale as well as drugs. And they're also charging him with a kingpin statute. Ross has gotten a lot of publicity for this. I'm sure he could use some more, so you can go to freeross.org to help him out with his defense, because he doesn't have any of the money because they seized all of what appear to be all of his bitcoins. And if he does have more bitcoins, he certainly can't access them from inside a federal prison cell. Andrew Jones is another one of the alleged operators of the Silk Road. He's facing similar charges as Ross Ulbricht, but hasn't gotten near as much press coverage. So not as many people know even what his name is. His name is Andrew Michael Jones. He's a Free State Project participant, and the federal government is alleging that he is one of the administrators of the Silk Road, was one of the administrators named Inigo. He needs help too, and you can go and give him some assistance at drewsdefense.org. That's drewsdefense.org. Now, Ellen, you're telling us about Charlie Shrem. Shrem is a businessman. He's fairly young. You said he's 24 years old now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I've known him for a couple years. So when he was running Bitinstant, he was probably, his earlier 20s, 22 years old or something like that. And he just, not necessarily suggesting that age would have brought this wisdom, experience does. And he didn't encrypt any of the critical messages that he was sending about the business that he was doing, which was exchanging Bitcoin for cash, or rather exchanging cash for Bitcoin. And that's what they've come after him for. So go ahead and continue with the story.
Right. So this is where it gets to the what I find to be ironic part, which is his lawyer, Mark Agniflo, said that what Shrem did was an aberration and that Shrem plans to continue working in the Bitcoin world if possible. So he wants to get back into Bitcoin again someday after all of these charges have passed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, this name's really difficult. Agniflo emphasized that his client was not involved in directly supplying Bitcoin to Silk Road users. We believe... Oh, shoot, sorry. The page jumped.
Oh, no.
I just
Never
lost my
fun when that
sentence.
happens. So, he wasn't directly involved in sending money to the Silk Road's buyers. He was sending them to one of their users. He was sending Bitcoin, rather, to one of their users, who was then, from what I understand, operating a cash in exchange for Bitcoin service. So people could send Bitcoin to him through the Silk Road, and he would send cash through the mail, from what I understand. Did you find your place?
Right. Okay. Yes, I've got it. So the two pleaded guilty as part of a deal struck with prosecutors from the Office of Manhattan U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara. They had been scheduled to go on trial September 22nd. U.S. authorities shut down Silk Road last year, though a new version bearing the same name was launched soon thereafter, like you were saying, Ian. The man accused of creating and operating Silk Road used the alias Dread Pirate Ross William Ulbricht, is facing separate charges and is scheduled for trial in November. Shrem stepped down from his post as vice chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation, a trade group, soon after his arrest in January. He was previously the chief executive of Bitinstant, a Bitcoin exchange company. So, he was. I remember hearing the name of this company a lot, like when I first moved here.
Yeah, well, that's because they were one of the best. They were probably the best option for a long time for exchanging cash for Bitcoin. They don't exist anymore, and they haven't for quite a while, except probably at least a year at this point. But they did it, and they did a good job of it. And the problem was, as time went on, they became more compliant. No, that's not the problem for them. They had to do it in order to keep doing business legally. They were based out of New York, and of course, as we've seen recently, New York has had some of the worst regulatory pushes for regulating Bitcoin. And so they had to keep, increasing the level of requirements as far as you had to show identification. You didn't used to have to show identification to get a transaction done. You would have had to have provided some ID eventually as time went on. And so they were kind of clamping down. But behind the scenes, Charlie Shrem was doing business directly with this individual sort of outside of the Bitinstant system. Still kind of using Bitinstant, but Charlie was using his sway with the business to kind of make the requirements go away for this guy, whereas all the rest of us, if we were doing that level of business, would have had to provide some ID and some regular identification.
So he was like a co-conspirator.
He basically was helping this guy get around the money transmitting laws and regulations, and so that's why they got him for it. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. We'll come back with more. And Bitcoin, I don't think we've mentioned this. It's a decentralized currency. We can tell you more about that coming up. It's Free Talk Live. Ellen, you've got a little bit more on this story about Charlie Shrem. He's the former operator of Bitinstant. And he was doing some sort of behind-the-scenes deals, although he unfortunately did not encrypt his communications about those behind-the-scenes deals. And so the feds were easily able to get into his email account and gather all kinds of evidence against him that he wasn't indeed following the rules, so to speak, these money transmitter rules that his company at the time, Bitinstant, was supposed to be following. And so because he was sort of working around those and giving this one guy a special treatment, they came after him and they came after the guy. The guy's name was Robert. And they both now have taken a guilty plea.
Right. According to this article from Reuters, prosecutors said Fayella, 54, operated an underground Bitcoin exchange on Silk Road under the name BTC King, providing currency for users engaged in illicit drug trafficking. Shrem processed transactions for Fayella through Bitinstant, despite knowing the Bitcoin would eventually find their way to Silk Road, where the funds would be used for drugs, he said in court. Both men agreed to forfeit $950,000 to the government as part of their plea deals. Robert Fayella and Charlie Shrem opted to travel down a crooked path, running an illegal money-transmitting business that catered to criminals bent on trafficking narcotics on the dark web drug site Silk Road, Bharara said in a statement.
This was the U.S. attorney who was speaking there. There's their prosecutor who was making that statement. And, okay, that's it. Well, you've shut down the underground drug market now. That you can pat yourself on the back and act like you've actually done something to have an impact. But no, you haven't. You've only punished one guy, and you've done nothing whatsoever to stop the international drug trade.
No, if anything, they're fanning the flames because now people are going to try to find more clever ways to get away from this situation.
Sure. I mean, the takeaway on this one is encrypt your emails when you're doing business that could be considered illegal.
Well, and I'm still curious because they keep mentioning, these Bitcoins were used to buy illegal things. But was he charged with, assisting someone in purchasing an illegal substance? It doesn't sound
like a
like
conspiracy
it at all. It sounds like he was only charged with illegal money transmission.
I don't
Ian,
remember.
if you handed me a $5 U.S. bill that said Federal Reserve at the top, and then I handed you either the $5 Bahamian bill or the $5 Canadian in my wallet, then we would be involved in an illegal money transaction.
How dare you?
Would we be? I don't know what the laws are, so I'm
I don't have a license. You don't have a license.
That's true.
You're not authorized to make that transaction, you guys. You have to fill out the proper paperwork before you can really tell if it's fair. You might be devaluing the dollar. Dear Lord.
Might be laundering this money.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. You are welcome to share your thoughts here at 855-450-FREE. But I agree, Ellen, with your assessment that it's sad when people are convicted of crimes that have no victim. There's no one who was harmed in this case.
No, they were doing people a valuable service.
Right. Both of the people who are transacting in this case were transacting voluntarily. No one was feeling like they got ripped off. The guy, Charlie was charging a percentage to make the transaction, and this guy was going on Silk Road and charging people a percentage to make transactions with him. And so everybody would have been fine had they just been left alone. But these federal agents are on this crusade to try to stop the flow of drugs, and it's just such a futile thing. But ultimately, it seems more like it's about money because they're getting nearly $1 million out of these men,
out of each of them.
Right. I mean, that's not going to any kind of victim. It's not going to go to make anyone whole.
The state is always the victim, Ian.
Well, it's ridiculous. The state doesn't exist.
Why don't you know this by now?
The state's just an idea. It can't be a victim of anything.
Well, apparently it was a victim of $950,000 apiece.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So I think it's sad that Shrem was saying earlier that you quoted him saying,
right. He said
I
that
did something wrong.
He knew what he was doing was wrong. Which, when I first read that, I thought, well, maybe they're skewing his words because he could have said something like, I knew that what I was doing was legally wrong. Like, technically speaking, I would have been charged for it in court, but maybe he didn't. Maybe he said it in a way that seemed like, well, it's wrong according to you, but I don't really think it's wrong. But
maybe
wording it slightly differently.
I mean, I don't know what's in Charlie Shrem's heart, but I know that
blood
is in
his heart.
He was likely saying those things in front of a judge. I suspect that was not actually a quote from a media interview,
right,
but a quote from like a statement that he was making about, I've been a bad boy,
he did
Judge.
Say that in court.
Please go ahead and just deal out whatever you want.
Right.
I've been so bad.
Which is kind of sad.
I throw myself on your mercy.
Like, where is his integrity there? Like, he knew from the beginning what he was doing, but he still went through with it. And all of a sudden now when he's in court, he's going to back off and say, no, this is actually wrong.
Well, there's nothing wrong with saving your own skin if you're not throwing someone else under the bus, right?
He's throwing all the other people who commit these purchases on the black market under the bus.
That's a stretch. That's a stretch.
I mean, if he's saying like...
He's not throwing anyone under the bus in that they're getting crushed by the wheels and are going to go to prison.
He's a perpetrator of this crime, and all of a sudden now he's turned against everyone else who's doing it and saying, no, you're doing something bad.
You're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
No, he's certainly indicting them verbally, but his action here in court of essentially eating some crow in front of the judge is going to serve him, and it will not serve him at anyone else's cost. So unlike somebody who will snitch on another person, so commonly like in the drug world, if you bust somebody, the police bust somebody, they'll demand they give up their dealer in order to get out of whatever the criminal charges are. That's throwing somebody under the bus. That's ruining somebody else's life to make your life a little bit less worse off because you won't get charged with something.
Right.
In this case, he's not doing anything like that. He's just saying, I was a bad boy and now please go easy on me, sir.
I can understand out of self-preservation if you want to, try and get your charges as low as possible. But still, to me, this is just excessively cowardly if he actually... Just because...
You're used to hanging around activists.
Because this is like... I'm looking at it from a purely, very principled point of view.
Yeah, well, people don't have those principles.
Right. When it comes to practice, you can't really stick to them.
That's
which I understand.
You may have the principles, but in a lot of cases, when the state comes around waving a big stick at you or a gun or whatever it is they're waving, in this case, rattling cage doors, I mean, he's facing 5 years in prison on this, and that's on the plea deal from what I understand. So he hasn't yet been sentenced, somewhat in the same way that Adam Kokesh apparently was sentenced just recently, yesterday or something like that, very, very recently. He's a totally different story. I'm hoping to get Adam on to talk more in detail about this, but in his case, it was gun charges in D.C., and he came up with some kind of a deal, but ultimately still had to face sentencing. I don't know how that works. It must be a federal thing where you make a deal, but then you're still rolling the dice to see what the judge is going to give you when sentencing happens. That sounds like what's going on with Shrem. But we'll come back with more, and you can share your thoughts at 855-450-FREE. Did Charlie Shrem do something wrong by selling Bitcoin for cash outside of the system? It's Free Talk Live.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.